More women's clothes. Button-down shirt.
58 days. No body. No crime scene. No suspect. And a sheriff's department so fractured that its own deputies voted on the record that they have zero confidence in the man running this investigation. That is where this true crime case stands right now. And somehow it just got more complicated. Because on day 56, while law enforcement was doing whatever law enforcement does when the cameras are not rolling, a regular guy, a YouTuber, with a camera, a grid map, and enough determination to embarrass trained investigators, walked into a dry riverbed on the outskirts of Tucson, Arizona. What he found there did not come from a tip line. It did not come from a press conference. It did not come from the FBI, the sheriff, or a single official source. It came from a man who went back to the same stretch of ground a second time because his instincts told him the first pass had missed something. He was right. Multiple items of clothing lying undisturbed in a desert drainage channel, documented in place, photographed exactly as found, and reported directly to the Pima County Sheriff's Department. That find alone would be significant in any active missing persons case. But this is not just any drainage channel. This is the wash that runs directly behind the home of the woman who picked up the phone on the morning of February 1st and reported Nancy Guthrie missing. In true crime, patterns do not lie. And what is building in that wash right now is a pattern that reshapes this entire investigation. This documentary is going to walk you through what was found, where it was found, what the geography means, what the institution responsible for this case has and has not done, and what all of it points toward in a case that has been full of questions and empty of answers for nearly 2 months. Stay with me. Because this does not start at the wash. It starts on the night Nancy Guthrie disappeared. Before we get into what was found, you need to understand who's found it. Because this is not a story about a lucky stumble. This is a story about discipline. Jim runs a YouTube channel called Exploring with Jim. He carries no badge. He draws no government salary. He has no forensic equipment and no institutional resources. What he has is a camera, a grid map, and the willingness to go back to difficult terrain again and again, because he understands something that formal search operations in this case have consistently failed to demonstrate publicly. That the first pass through challenging terrain is never the final word on what that terrain contains. Grid searching is exactly what it sounds like. You divide an area into a grid, you walk every section on foot, you document what you see, and then you go back. You do not assume that a previous pass coming up empty means the area is clean. In a desert wash system, conditions shift with every weather event. Wind moves material. Rain redistributes debris. Vegetation thins. What was invisible 3 weeks ago can be sitting in plain sight after a single storm system moves through. Jim understands that. It is why he was back in that wash on March 28th, and it is why this documentary exists. This was not Jim's first significant find in this investigation. A pair of pants had already been recovered from the same drainage channel weeks earlier, the same corridor running behind Annie Guthrie's property. That discovery was documented, reported, and tracked by the true crime community. When Jim returned on day 56 and found not one item but multiple pieces in the same defined stretch of ground, the reaction online was immediate. Because anyone following this case closely enough understood what a second find in the same location means. One find can be coincidence. A cluster of finds in the same confined geographic area on different dates is something else entirely. It is a direction. And in a 58-day investigation with no confirmed crime scene and no confirmed route of movement, a direction is exactly what this case has been missing. What also makes Jim's approach worth examining is his handling protocol. He does not move items. He does not rearrange them. He documents in place, photographs exactly as found, reports to law enforcement, and posts publicly, so the record cannot be quietly walked back after the fact. In an investigation where the institution responsible for this case has a documented history of receiving community-sourced information and failing to communicate what it did with it, that public documentation is not just responsible, it is essential. The geography of this case is not background detail, it is evidence. Until you understand this terrain, what it looks like, how it moves, what it conceals, and why, you cannot fully understand what a clothing cluster in that specific location actually means. Tucson, Arizona, Pima County, a residential neighborhood inside the jurisdictional boundaries of the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Behind a house in that neighborhood runs a wash. For anyone outside the American Southwest, A wash is a natural drainage channel, or dry most of the year, sometimes for years at a stretch, but capable of carrying fast-moving water through the desert landscape when monsoon season hits. These channels cut through Tucson neighborhoods in ways that roads and sidewalks do not. Residents back up to them, live beside them, and in many cases barely think about them. A break in the fence line, the place where the desert insists on remaining wild inside a city grid. They are also genuinely difficult to search. A Tucson wash can be thick with palo verde, brittle bush, and creosote. The ground is rocky and uneven. The channel floor can sit 12 feet below the surrounding grade, in some stretches and nearly flush with the landscape in others. Flash flood events move material. Sometimes 50 yards downstream in a single storm, they bury things, they expose things, and they run through residential neighborhoods largely invisible to any camera system covering roads, driveways, and front-facing property lines. That last part is the piece that matters most in this investigation. The wash behind Annie Guthrie's properties provides a route from the back of that property through a fence line into a drainage channel running away from the house through low-visibility desert terrain. That is a path that does not cross a paved street. It does not pass in front of a Ring doorbell camera. It does not move under a street light or through any camera angle covering the road-facing portions of that neighborhood. It runs through vegetation and rocky ground that sits below surrounding grade and disappears from any street-level surveillance perspective almost immediately after leaving the property boundary. At night, in the early morning hours of February 1st, that route is not just camera-free, it is functionally invisible. And in a case where the central investigative mystery has always been how Nancy Guthrie left or was moved from that property without appearing on any surveillance system. A route that surveillance structurally cannot see is not a footnote. It is the answer to the question the investigation has been unable to answer for 58 days. The wash is speaking. It has been speaking since the first pants discovery, and on March 28th it said something louder than anything it had said before. Precision matters here. Everything in this section is sourced from a documented post on X published on March 28, 2026, by the account at Hope is Faith 24. That post was a reply to a true crime account and was tagged to Nancy Grace. The photographs in that post are the evidentiary foundation for what follows. What is confirmed gets stated as confirmed. What is not gets stated as not. That line does not move. On day 56 of the search for Nancy Guthrie, Exploring with Jim returned to the wash behind Annie Guthrie's property and found multiple items of clothing lying in the drainage channel. Based on the photographs in the documented post, those items appear to include a dark jacket and pants, multiple pieces, same wash, same geographic corridor where pants had already been recovered during a prior search. The items were lying undisturbed on the ground. They had not been moved or rearranged before being photographed. Jim documented them exactly as found, in place in the position they were in when he encountered them. The find was reported to the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Deputies were notified. That reporting is confirmed in the documented post. What is not confirmed is whether these items have any connection to Nancy Guthrie or to the events of February 1st. That connection has not been established by the Pima County Sheriff's Department, by the FBI, or by any forensic authority. Establishing that connection requires physical collection, laboratory analysis, potential DNA and fiber testing, and an official determination. None of that has been publicly confirmed. We have a location, photographs, a pattern, and a notification to the sheriff. That is significant. It is more than enough to take seriously. It is not a conclusion. What the evidence has earned is a specific set of investigative questions. How did multiple items end up in the same defined stretch of drainage channel that had surely produced a prior find? What does the condition of those items tell investigators about how long they have been there? What does their positioning within the channel say about the direction they traveled and where they came from? And what does the cluster of two separate finds in the same corridor on different dates say about whether this location is incidental to this case or central to it? Those are not rhetorical. Those are the exact questions that forensic field investigation exists to answer, and they can only be answered if the items are collected and processed by people with the authority and resources to do that work. Within hours of the documented post going public, the true crime community response was immediate and substantive. People were pulling satellite maps, locating the prior find relative to the March 28th discovery, calculating distances, examining photographs for fabric type, weathering, and positioning, cross-referencing the geography with every established theory about movement from that property on the night Nancy disappeared. This was applied investigative analysis from people who have spent 2 months building detailed working knowledge of this case. And it was more geographically specific and investigatively rigorous than anything the Pima County Sheriff's Department had shared publicly in the same period. This is where the documentary shifts from reporting what happened to analyzing what it means. A location that has produced multiple clothing finds and an active missing persons. Investigation is no longer a geographic feature, it is a signal. And in a 58-day case with no confirmed physical evidence, no confirmed crime scene, and no confirmed route of movement, that signal is the closest thing to a direction this investigation has produced. Early in the investigation, a pair of pants was recovered from the drainage channel behind Annie Guthrie's property. Documented, reported, tracked. In isolation, a single clothing item in a desert wash can be explained. Wind carried it in. Someone unrelated dropped it. It has been there for months with no connection to this case. That alternative explanation is always available with a single finding in an open outdoor environment. Honest investigative thinking holds it there. Then March 28th arrives. Same wash, same corridor. Not one item, no, multiple. A jacket, additional pants, a cluster in the same defined stretch of ground that had already produced a find. Different date. Same location. And that is where? The investigative calculus changes entirely. One find is an anomaly. 2 finds in the same location on different dates is a cluster. Clusters in serious missing persons investigations are how routes get established. They are how timelines get built. They are how a location moves from background detail to primary investigative focus. A cluster does not prove what happened. What it does is eliminate the randomness argument with enough force that no investigator working this case responsibly can leave the coincidence explanation on the table. Former FBI analysts discussing no-body investigations have outlined the methodology of working backward from physical evidence clusters. You find items. You ask how they arrived. You factor in terrain, grade, and the direction material would travel from an upstream origin. You trace the most probable path backward from discovery point to origin. In a desert wash, items deposited from a specific property follow the channel downhill. 2 finds in the same downstream stretch of that channel point toward a common upstream origin, and the upstream origin of the drainage corridor where those items were found is the property that sits at the center of this investigation. That is not an accusation. That is an investigative geometry, and the geometry has been pointing the same direction since the first pair of pants was found in that wash. The March 28th cluster did not change the direction. It confirmed it with a weight the single prior find could not carry alone. The sheriff has been notified. In any other case, in any other jurisdiction, those 4 words would be reassuring. In this one, they are a question, because the Pima County Sheriff's Department is not most jurisdictions, and before this documentary moves past that notification, the institutional record needs to be on the table. Sheriff Chris Nanos has been the subject of a formal no-confidence vote from within his own department, not from outside critics, from inside, from deputies and personnel who work under him, who know this department's internal operations firsthand, and who went on record to state they do not trust his leadership. In an active, high-profile missing persons investigation, that institutional rupture is not administrative noise. It is direct context for how this investigation has been managed. Former Pima County Chief Deputy Rick Castigar, a man who knows this department from the inside, spoke publicly and on the record about concerns with how this case has been approached. Specific, credible, named. His statements carry the weight of someone who cannot be dismissed as an outside observer with a platform agenda. And then there is the single most devastating sentence spoken publicly about this case since Nancy disappeared. Former Sheriff Richard Carmona, who held this exact job before Nanos and who carries the additional standing of being a former United States Surgeon General, stated publicly that the crime scene had been permanently corrupted, not compromised, not damaged in recoverable ways, permanently. That word, from a man of that standing attached to his name, has never been satisfactorily addressed by the current administration of this department. That is the backdrop against which the sheriff has been notified must be understood. This community has been here before. Tips reported, fines submitted, information surfaced and handed over, and the public accounting of what happened to that information has been incomplete at best. So when Jim reported the March 28th clothing find to the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the questions that followed were urgent. Did deputies go to the wash and physically examine the site? Did they collect the items through proper chain of custody protocol? Did they cross-reference this find with this prior pants discovery and treat the cluster as a pattern requiring elevated focus? Did they involve the FBI? Documented public answers to those questions do not exist as of the time this documentary was produced. And in a case with this level of public attention and this level of prior institutional failure on the record, that absence is not acceptable. It is its own kind of answer. If these items are collected and forensic analysis connects them to Nancy Guthrie, that is the turning point that this case has not had in 58 days. If analysis finds no connection, that closes a theory and redirects focus with a clarity speculation that never produces. Both outcomes have value. Both move this investigation forward. But if those items are not collected, if this department receives a second notifications of a clothing cluster in the same wash behind the same property, and responds with the same silence that has defined its public communication throughout this case, then this community will have its answer about this institution. And that answer belongs in the permanent true crime record of this investigation. Everything in this investigation radiates from a single point. One night. One property. One phone call. February 1st in 2026. And the clothing now clustering in that wash is pulling this documentary back to that night with a force that can no longer be redirected. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, reported missing from a residential property in Tucson on the morning of February 1st. The call that started this investigation came from Annie Guthrie, the woman whose property backs directly under the drainage channel that has now produced multiple clothing finds. Whatever happened in the hours before that call happened in a window this investigation has never been able to precisely define. And 58 days later, that window is still the mystery. What the investigation has established, or more precisely failed to establish in it, is how Nancy left. No surveillance footage clearly capturing a departure. No ring camera, no neighbor's camera, no vehicle confirmed to have transported her, no pavement trace. No confirmed witness. The absence of a visible exit route for an 84-year-old woman from a camera-covered residential neighborhood has been the most persistent and confounding element of this entire case. The wash answers it, not with forensic certainty, but geographically, it answers it completely. A route from the back of that property through a fence line into a drainage channel that bypasses every camera angle covering the road-facing portions of that neighborhood. No paved surface, no streetlight, no doorbell camera field of view. Terrain that sits below surrounding grade and disappears from any surveillance perspective immediately after leaving the property boundary. At night, in the early morning hours of February 1st, that road is functionally invisible. That is not a dramatic construction. That is what the terrain physically is. And in true crime documentary analysis, when the geography of a location provides a plausible explanation for something that has been unexplainable for 58 days, that geography is a priority, not a theory. The investigative methodology of working backward from physical evidence now has two anchor points in that wash. Trace the first find upstream. Trace the second. Ask where the most probable origin of that corridor is. The answer has not changed between the first discovery and the March 28th cluster. It has only become harder to argue against with a second find confirming the same location, the same corridor, and the same upstream direction. The root question of this investigation, how did Nancy leave or how was she moved without leaving a trace on any camera, has a geographic answer. It has been sitting in that wash the entire time. Let's put the record on the table. Because what this true crime community has produced in 58 days is not a footnote to the official investigation. In many ways, it is the investigation. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has had the budget, the badge, the forensic resources, and the legal authority since the morning of February 1st. What they have produced publicly is a series of press conferences, an internal no-confidence vote, and a former U.S. Surgeon General stating on the record that the crime scene was permanently corrupted. That is the official side of this equation. Here is the community side. Information about names associated with a specific inquiry in this case surfaced through community channels before law enforcement had publicly addressed it. Forensic blood analysis. The donut-shaped drops, the indoor blood evidence, the pattern implications for origin point and sequence was being discussed in detailed, methodologically grounded terms by this community long before any official forensic accounting reached the public. A University of Arizona athletics label was spotted in publicly available evidence footage by online investigator at Chi-Im, identified with enough confidence that she stated her finding explicitly and indicated she would submit it to authorities. A behavioral detail, the flashlight and mouth marker, was identified, contextualized, and connected to a specific type of worker with a specific kind of site familiarity entirely through community analysis. And then there is the wash. Explored with Jim, walked on foot, documented correctly, reported through proper channels, posted publicly so the record could not be managed away, twice. Not one of those threads began with an official press release. Every single one originated in this community, and every single one forced the institution into a reactive position, responding to what civilians surfaced rather than leading with what official resources found. The criticism sometimes directed at citizen investigators that they contaminate scenes, spread misinformation, complicate official investigations is not without theoretical basis, but it does not describe what has happened in this case. The record here supports Jim. It supports every analyst who pulled a map at midnight and cross-referenced a geography. It supports every person who went frame by frame through publicly available footage until a detail revealed itself. The record of this investigation is a record of the community finding things and the institution playing catch-up. 58 days of it. What makes Jim's approach a model within this community is not just what he found, it is how he found it, and what he did after. Rigorous grid methodology, return visits based on data, in-place documentation, immediate law enforcement notification, permanent public posting. That combination is what separates responsible civilian investigation from the kind of involvement that legitimate forensic concerns are actually directed at. He is not contaminating anything. He is finding what the institution missed and handling it correctly. Twice. In the same location. In a case that a former county sheriff described as having its crime scene permanently corrupted by the very institution that was supposed to protect it. This community has done everything right. It has surfaced information, submitted it, posted it publicly, and kept watching. The accountability question now belongs entirely to the institution on the receiving end of everything this community has produced. There is a layer to this investigation that sits above the wash, above the geography, and above the institutional failures documented throughout this case. The family layer, and specifically the most publicly visible member of that family. Savannah Guthrie is a Today Show anchor, one of the most recognizable journalists in American television. When her mother went missing from a residential property in Tucson, she brought to this case something that missing persons investigations involving elderly women in mid-sized American cities almost never have. A national platform, a journalist's understanding of information movement, and the kind of media access that transformed a local disappearance into a case the entire country was watching. She used all of it deliberately. Former FBI Special Agent Harry Trombus confirmed publicly that Savannah's media appearances were coordinated with law enforcement as an investigative tool, not spontaneous, not reactive, coordinated. That confirmation is foundational to how every public statement she has made in this case should be read. Her appearances served a strategic, investigative purpose. What she chose to say was chosen. What she chose to withhold was chosen with equal deliberateness. Her Today Show interview reframed this investigation in real time. She said investigators had stood over her bed, not searched the home generally, stood over a specific bed in a specific room. That detail was not accidental. Investigators standing over a bed means there was something about that sleeping space, its condition, its contents, the physical evidence present, that warranted that specific, deliberate examination. From a woman with Savannah Guthrie's professional training, that detail did not slip out. It was placed. She referenced responding to ransom notes, not dismissing them, responding, which means law enforcement determined they warranted engagement. That shaped the early investigative direction of this case in ways the public was not fully informed about at the time. Now here's the element this documentary cannot step around. The wash that has produced two separate clothing clusters runs behind Annie Guthrie's house. Annie is the family member who made the call reporting Nancy missing. Annie's property is the geographic origin point of the drainage corridor where the clothing was found. Annie has not been publicly named as a suspect by any law enforcement agency. That is stated clearly and without qualification. But the wash is behind Annie's house. The finds are in that wash. Those are facts. In responsible true crime analysis, facts do not soften because of the family relationships attached to them. The geography does not change based on who owns the property the drainage channel runs behind. Savannah returns to national television on April 6th. What she says, and what she does not say, will be read against the backdrop of 2 clothing finds in a wash behind her family member's property in Tucson, Arizona. She is a journalist. She understands exactly how audiences receive information. She understands what a carefully chosen detail communicates, and what a carefully maintained silence communicates. And when she sits in front of that camera, this true crime community will be watching with the same focused analytical attention it is applied to every other moment in this case. 58 days. That number carries a weight in this true crime investigation that gets heavier with every day that passes, without a confirmed scene, a confirmed route, or a publicly named person of interest. And now, a YouTuber has found clothing in a desert wash twice. The sheriff has been notified. The record is public and permanent. The next move belongs to an institution whose record in this case has already been called into question by people with far more standing than any documentary channel on the internet. The items found on March 28th need to be collected. If they have not already been physically recovered and entered into evidence through a proper documented chain of custody, that needs to happen immediately. Every hour those items remain in an open outdoor wash is an hour that weather and terrain can degrade material. This investigation cannot afford to lose. Once collected, forensic analysis needs to follow. DNA, fiber, biological material, tested against every known reference sample relevant to this investigation, and the results need to be communicated publicly with the transparency that 58 days of institutional opacity has made mandatory. In true crime history, no body missing persons cases turn on physical evidence, not confessions that may never come, not eyewitness accounts from a dark night when the route taken bypassed every camera. On physical evidence, a fiber, a DNA trace, a biological marker on a piece of clothing found in a desert wash that places a specific person at a specific location at a relevant point in time. That is how these cases break. The wash behind Annie Guthrie's house is now the single most concentrated point of physical evidence this investigation has produced in 58 days. A positive forensic result connecting those items to Nancy Guthrie changes everything. It establishes the wash as a documented evidentiary location. It provides the route reconstruction that has been the missing foundational element of this case since February 1st. It moves this from a no-body case with no confirmed scene to a no-body case with a forensically validated geographic thread. A negative result is also valuable. It closes a theory, redirects investigative focus, and produces the kind of clarity that 58 days of unanswered questions have never generated. But if neither outcome materializes, if the Pima County Sheriff's Department receives this notification and returns to the same public silence that has characterized its communication throughout this investigation, then this community will have its answer about this institution. And that answer will sit permanently in the true crime documentary record of this case in a way that no press conference will ever walk back. Here's the framework this documentary leaves you with. Not a theory, not a conclusion the evidence has not earned. A framework. The wash is a location. Specific. Defined. Geographically significant. It has produced physical evidence twice. That is a fact. The pattern of finds is a signal. 2 separate discoveries in the same corridor on different dates. Both documented, both reported, both in the permanent public record. That is a fact, the sheriff. Notification is a documented event. What the institution does with it from this point is visible to everyone watching. That is a fact. And this community, every person who has spent any part of the last 58 days pulling maps, analyzing photographs, walking terrain, and refusing to accept silence as an answer, is the reason this investigation carries any public accountability at all. That is also a fact, and is the most important one in this documentary. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. That sentence has not changed in 58 days. It is the sentence at the center of everything this community does and everything that keeps people like Jim walking into a dry Arizona riverbed in the desert sun when it would be so much easier to look the other way. The clothing is in that wash. The sheriff has been notified. Savannah Guthrie returns to national television on April 6th, and the Pima County Sheriff's Department is sitting at the most significant evidentiary moment. This investigation has reached since the morning it began, and this community is watching. This documentary will cover it when it breaks, not when it fits a news cycle, when it matters. And right now, in a drainage channel behind a house in Tucson, Arizona, it matters more than it ever has. Nancy Guthrie is not forgotten. She has never been forgotten, and she will not be forgotten until this country gets a real answer. One the evidence supports, one forensic science validates, one that 58 days of questions and one man walking a desert wash twice finally made impossible to ignore.